For more than 20 years, residents living near a former DuPont factory in Athens claimed something in their water was making them sick, only to be told by government experts there was no health hazard.
But they were right all along. The problem is the water, with the Athens Clark County government declaring a public health emergency.
Well, Fox 5 team reporter Johnny Edwards has the story of why it took the government so long to find the truth. Johnny?
Well, Russ and Courtney, this is a low-income neighborhood that complained nearly every home had someone develop some form of cancer. They might still be searching for the truth were it not for the Athens mayor. This is a story about knowing when you're right.
But the fact that, people started dying, we noticed that people started having cancer.
Even when experts say you're wrong.
So they were really just sort of shunted to the side.
For generations living along this rural Athens 2 lane, the truth was in their face. Why do you think you have prostate cancer?
It comes from that water, I believe.
And they believed it had something to do with the factory through the woods, once a carpet fibers plant formerly owned by DuPont, with family members, neighbors, struck with cancer and other diseases, dying.
I have lost personally my great-grandmother. I've lost my auntie, Betty Flint.
Community members say they count at least 31 cancer cases throughout the neighborhood.
Sister, mom and daddy, neighbors. Yeah, and kinfolk, close cousin.
They say the cause of all this, the water they drew from the ground and drank, bathed in, cooked with. Residents say they knew for decades there was something wrong with the water coming out of these wells, even though time after time, agencies charged with protecting them told them it was fine. In the 2000s, multiple state and federal agencies looked into their claims, with water testing, a cancer cluster study, and a brick wall. From the Georgia Division of Public Health in 2006, no apparent public health hazard. That report, backed by the federal Atlanta-based Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, part of the CDC, also reporting no cancer cluster exists.
I spent a good bit of my childhood out here.
Neffy Davis grew up on Pittard Road from the 1970s to the early 90s, her extended family living in 2 homes.
We had plum trees, peach trees, apple trees, blackberries.
Breast cancer would take her aunt, Glenda Crumley, who died in 2007. 2 of her uncles, Rufus Dowdy Jr. and Michael Dowdy, say they both have prostate cancer. You all knew things were in the water.
We've always known that there was something wrong with the water, always.
The family homes now abandoned.
We just don't want to risk passing this down to anyone in our family.
3 years ago, the city commissioned a study using prior research, reaching the same conclusion. No evidence of toxic releases, prompting more outcry.
As of today, have you asked anyone to test those wells?
So Athens Mayor Kelly Gertz did just that, this time turning not to a government agency, but to the Southern Environmental Law Center.
It simply was the number of cases.
The nonprofit had 8 wells tested, this time testing for something regulators didn't look for back in the 2000s when the science was still emerging. PFAS, short for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as forever chemicals, used in food wrapping, nonstick cookware, and, yes, carpet fibers, linked to liver damage, thyroid problems, and, yes, various forms of cancer.
We found concentrations of those chemicals way higher than the level that EPA says is safe for human consumption.
How much higher?
One of the PFAS, PFOA, the limit is only 4 parts per trillion. In some wells, we were finding them as high as 20 parts per trillion, so 5 times higher.
She says the next step for regulators, determining where the PFAS came from, the plant or somewhere else.
We do suspect that the PFAS came from that facility, but again, we don't yet have enough data to actually show that that is the case.
That site has gone through 2 separate owners since DuPont sold it in 2003. No longer producing carpet fibers, it's now run by an entirely different company, making biodegradable polymers. But true to their name, forever chemicals are believed to take centuries to break down naturally. The city spent $60,000 connecting 15 homes on wells to public water.
While it's painful to know that for over 2 decades, people were drinking contaminated water, what's good is that at least we've ended that.
We reached out to DuPont for this story, but a spokesman told us not to bring the company into this. He said after a series of mergers, sales, and rebrandings, DuPont isn't the same company anymore that once operated the Athens plant.
Somebody needs to kind of check in this thing pretty serious, man, and find out what is what.
Now, new on this, the I-Team has learned since those independent tests, the federal EPA has gone back to Pittard Road and done its own testing, confirming what the nonprofit found: PFAS contamination beyond acceptable limits in several of those wells. In part 2 of this story, coming next week, we'll look at how so many government agencies got this so wrong and why none of them came back sooner after the hazards of forever chemicals became well known. Russ, Courtney?
Well, it's just devastating to hear people talk about how this has affected so many families, that they've lost loved ones to this. But I would imagine that these families want more than to have this be connected to the well water. Is there any litigation in the works?
Well, without a doubt. I'm told there's several residents out there that are seeking legal representation. I'm not aware of anybody that's been hired. And now the Southern Environmental Law Center will not be involved in that. But that attorney, Ms. Lipscomb, tells me that, you know, the next step for regulators and for these residents is to figure out exactly where these chemicals came from and how they got into their well water.
Yeah, and honestly, these PFAS, these forever chemicals, that's going to be an issue for all of us.
For a very long time. I mean, they're called forever for a reason.
Yeah, it's really concerning. Johnny, thanks.
Thank you.